What is going on, everybody? Thank you for coming and joining the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and it is great to have everybody here this evening. It is Thursday. It is the first podcast episode of the week, and I have to do a solid by my buddy Mark, who is Centerline Systems in the comment section. He had recently done something pertaining to a song in one of his chats that he has going on, and nobody, for whatever reason, was able to figure out what the song was and or what it was in relation to. And me being the massive nerd that I am, I knew exactly what it was right away. And so, Mark, I guess that just kind of lets the cat out of the bag. Mark knows I'm a huge gaming fan. I like Fallout. I have like an absolute love of the Fallout series. And so the song was from Fallout New Vegas by Marty Robbins, who did the song, obviously, long before New Vegas ever was a thing. And yeah, it was like one of the biggest songs for the game, Big Iron. And so good. So freaking good. If you haven't listened to it, go check out Marty Robbins. Great song. Mark, that one's for you. I hope you really appreciate that little shout out there. But without further ado, well, hey man, I'm just here to tell you, like nobody else was gonna get it. But no, seriously, you guys gotta go get cultured. Listen to some Marty Robbins. It's a good time. Anyways, the agenda for tonight, or I should say the show lineup for tonight is going to be a few different topics here. And they're topics that I think are pretty relevant to the conversation. Certainly they've been in the conversation as of recent times. And I do think to some degree that they do have an effect on not only things perhaps potentially abroad, as one of these subjects or two of these subjects are going to be, but more what are going to be the impacts, if any, on us, the American citizens, and how are we going to deal with these depending on how some of these play out. The topics are essentially going to be, it's going to be the conversation around federalizing the police. We're going to be looking at the war against the cartels. And in conjunction with that, like, really, like, are we really looking to start meddling in the country of Georgia? Is this really going to be the way that we're going to try and salvage whatever the disaster that Ukraine was somewhere else and try to start another front that we seriously can't substantiate? I guess we're going to have to just kind of delve into that a little bit and see kind of where things are kind of heading and what conclusions or perhaps non-conclusions we can make at this point. So I'm going to just go through the chat here real quick just to say hi to everybody. Centerline Systems, great to see you. Gene, I appreciate you, brother. I totally understand. Go grab some sleep. We will see you in the next one for sure. Gene, for those of you that don't realize, Gene is pretty much an OG. He's over across the pond, and his timeline is way skewed from ours. So I appreciate you, brother. It looks like we have Learned Me Something in Quest Views in the house. Chuck, great to have you, brother. Let's see who else here. Looks like Ground Fog is also in the house. It is so good to have everybody here tonight. Really, really excited to kind of do this one. So thank you, everybody, for stopping in, taking some time out of your day, and putting up with probably some of my autistic schizo rants pertaining to different subjects. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Now, I know that was a lot. Two more things. And I can't leave these out. Saturday, this coming Saturday, Rebecca Whiting is going to be coming back on, and we are going to be covering some more agricultural and farm conversations, as well as the conversation around divesting from the empire and investing into liberty, and some of the different things that ways that we can localize liberty and really bring things back to the community level, and how we can start to make that better move, that better pivot into something that's going to be a lot more fruitful. And on Saturday, or September 4th, put it down in your books, okay? Make sure you chalk it down in your books. September 4th, everybody, I am having Scott Horton back on the show. And I am super excited about this because we are going to hopefully pick up from the conversation we left off on. And hopefully we can really go through some of the other issues that we didn't get around to talking to, and be able to elaborate and expound upon more of the issue that we left off on, which is the situation over in Europe, how our relationship with Europe is functioning or lack thereof, what the direction of Ukraine and Russia is going to go, and what it's going to lead to down the road, and possibly quite a bit more. I am so excited to have Scott coming back on, and I hope you all are too. I really, really look forward to this, and I really look forward to having Rebecca back on, and she is excited too. I just talked to her today, and she loved all of the questions. So gear up. Bring your questions, and let's make this a good one. So without further ado, that is all of the housekeeping. I swear it is all of the housekeeping. So let's get into it. Federalizing the police. Oh boy, this is definitely one of the conversations of all time. A lot of people tend to, they kind of tend to be a little sympathetic to the idea of federalizing the police. And I understand 100%, because there are several cities where things are completely out of control. And to some degree, there's got to be like some apparatus to where things come back down to the ground. They find some roots, and perhaps we can start to fix some of these problems. Now, it's a very appealing thing, having the federal government take control or be able to integrate themselves with the local police. But we need to step back and we need to evaluate a few things. Is there the potential that you could improve and or fix or secure a city potentially with more resources, more funding, more backing, if you will? There is always the potential that can be the case, right? Because and look, we if we are going to evaluate something, and if we're going to say we're against something, we at least have to try and understand to the best of our abilities. And perhaps maybe I don't do it as effectively, but just hear me out here. It's one of those things to where, can it be a benefit? Sure. There's a lot of things that could be a benefit. You get more resources, more funding, you have more pull, you definitely get more from involving the federal government. But we have all seen that more resources, more funding, more backing, endless amounts of money thrown at a problem does not always fix said problems. Actually, seldom does it actually fix the problem. It does a lot to obscure. It does a lot to put on the perception that it's fixing a problem, but it doesn't always, and rarely does it ever, actually fix the problem. So when you look at federalizing the police, this is kind of an aspect that the federal government would bring. And in conjunction to that, the other thing that we see as well is a situation in which we have to ask ourselves, do we want centralized control of the local, state police forces, especially the sheriffs? The sheriffs are an elected position. And what is the potential outcome for that? Now, for me, if we look at federalizing the police and we look at how that will potentially and probably invariably centralize control and consolidate everything into one grotesque amalgamation, it also takes away the local populace of being able to affect change with those particular departments, with those particular stations. See, albeit it's not perfect, the local populace still to some degree has a say and has some control in many ways over their local police departments, and more especially their sheriff. I would say the sheriff is probably the best form of law enforcement or public service, being a public servant, which is the appropriate thing instead of law enforcement. It's probably the best form that we have because it is an elected position. It has the highest level of scrutiny that you can bestow essentially upon a public servant, at least as it pertains to police or law enforcement, whatever the case is. The conventional idea of what this is. When you bring in the federal government, what happens is now the localized community perspective becomes less of a factor and less of an issue and less of a concern versus what the federal government feels that it needs to do. So now you have this ever enlarging, this more grotesque, this more ever controlling, consolidating force that, yes, it very possibly can start to bring some form of order. But in the end of the day, from that order, you're going to have a degradation of your rights and liberties, because invariably any government entity that ever assumes more power, you show me in history where it's ever fully relented that power. It's one of those things that a government, once it takes that power in it, it's never going to relent it. So if anybody thinks that, even we've all seen the word temporary thrown around, anybody that genuinely thinks that federalizing the police force just temporarily, just to get the police department back on its feet, just to be able to, organize things and consolidate things, and just to help kind of with the aspect of policing, it's never going to be temporary. There's no authority or powers that are ever assumed that are ever going to be temporary. So we run into this issue to where, yes, like there are more resources. Yes, you do expand the ability of being able to patrol or enforce or do whatever the case is. But I would argue that what you open up with this door is ever enlarging government, more tyrannical government, a government that once it seizes power is never going to relent that power. They're going to get so used to filling that function that they're never going to want to relent it. They're even going to make a line or a diatribe and saying, like, look at how great things are. Look at how successful we are. We can't lose. We can't possibly, go back now, because now we can't trust local municipalities. We can't trust the local people of the populace to properly do this job. So we have to do it. And then what does that start to look like? You start to become more and more, and I know this is kind of a ridiculous point, and it goes without saying, but you take a police state that we have right now and you expand it by about 10 times, and you'll probably start to see maybe I'm wrong about this, but I would be willing to bet that instead of regular police cars, you would start to see up-armored trucks in the very least on your streets versus a patrol car when it comes to federal policing. I don't think I go too far in this, because if you look at the dynamic of how these things occur and you look at how extreme these things become, you're creating the conditions of an all-controlling police state. And we're already in some form of a police state. I would argue we're already in some form of a despotism light, if you ask me. But in the end of the day, as appealing as it is, you can't expect this to come into play or into force without sacrificing liberties, without sacrificing the control that we have as individuals, and moreover, sacrificing the rights that come with those liberties and that control. It's a very, very trepidatious and perilous situation. And I remember a conversation that I had had not long ago. And, and I think about how allowing, there was an example that was given to where if you have two towns, one town, is overwhelmingly rife with corruption. The other town, I don't believe there's zero corruption in town, but the other towns, for the most part, is pretty good. It's pretty successful. Jobs are paying well. Housing's affordable. Crime is pretty low. They have a pretty good pattern. You have this other town that starts out this way, but it starts to degrade, and they start importing a lot more hedonism. They start importing a lot more vices. They start importing and all of these things. And you see this town go into destitution. Even the law enforcement, even the police, the public servants are falling down, and they're becoming entrapped and embroiled in scandals and corruption and all of this. If it gets to a point to where it's unfixable, you're going to eventually have people from that town that want to go somewhere else. I'm a pretty big proponent of, whether it's municipalities, politicians, whatever the case is, organizations, they ought to be scrutinized at the merits of their work. They ought to stand on their merits and their principles and the foundations of which they build. If these things start to fall apart, sure, offer some advice, potentially help them out in a realistic way, not a ridiculous way. But if it doesn't take, then that city, that town, whatever the case is, should be allowed to fail. You should not subsidize bad behavior. You shouldn't continue fomenting and propping up a town that is failing. It should fail to some degree, if not entirely. And the other town that on its own merits is thriving, has a great foundation, is relatively safe, it has great jobs and all of these things, it's going to succeed upon its own merits. It's clearly doing something that is working in favor of it. And I would argue that there are policies and stuff like that. But I guess what my point is, instead of federalizing, there's a lot of options that can be taken to try and deal with this issue. Now, it may be unpopular, but if things get bad enough, the governor may choose to send in the National Guard. But if you're going to send in the National Guard, there are parameters to doing that. And there should be a fundamental understanding of how that works. The other portion of it is you let the town fail and you allow it to crumble upon the merits that it has. And I'm not saying that's perfect. I'm not saying it's going to look good, but you shouldn't subsidize bad behavior either. And I think that only what comes from that is more and more chaos, and more corruption, more and more destitute situations. Federalizing the police is not going to make this never happen. It's not going to prevent something like this from ever happening. All it's going to do, in most cases, if not all cases, is collectivize that power, bring it to the federal government. It's never going to relinquish that power, and it's almost always going to be at the cost of your rights and liberty. It's not to say that there couldn't be some positive outcomes that come short term, maybe a couple years, whatever the case is. But if you're not fixing the actual issue at the core of what's creating these problems, then federalizing the police force is not going to fix it. So I kind of want to just leave that and let you guys stew on that. I'm going to take take a moment here just to read through some of the comments, because I see that the comments are coming through. But it's a very relevant conversation, one that we should be having, and we have to be very, very careful and considerate when we start having these conversations about how much we're willing to give up and how much we're willing to let them take, because it is a give and take. And I'm here to tell you, what you give, rarely, or even in any remote time period, are you going to be able to get back. It's going to usually take a fairly long time. So let me just go through some of these here. Thanks everybody for commenting. I really appreciate this. So they're all public employees, overt ones at that, running around in masks, arresting folks for doxing is such bad PR. They are not clandestine employees. Yeah, I mean, public servants is public servants. You are beholden to the public trust and to the public. And it becomes one of those things to where when you start to have to mask, or when you start to have to obscure what your intentions are, your actions, and Tom had even talked about this, Tom Meddling, if you haven't had the chance to hear him or listen to what he has to say on my podcast, go check him out over on Tom Meddling on his YouTube page. I will throw some links there too. He's a great economist, but he had a really, really good show last night. And he was talking about how what we started to see, especially with the free speech thing issue, is especially as it pertained to Israel, you had people that were writing columns, they were writing papers, they were writing various op-eds and stuff like that. And before you know it, ICE was showing up in masks, playing like not even representing themselves as ICE. They had balaclavas on. They were decked to the nines with tack gear and rifles and stuff like that, but they weren't in like a uniform per se. And they're essentially running around like clandestine operatives, just snatching people up on the streets for saying something mean about Israel because somebody wrote an op-ed or a letter or whatever the case is. And so it's like, if they're willing to do this over your First Amendment, this is the glimpse that you already have into what federalizing the police is, right? So, I mean, when you invite the federal government in to take over potentially your little small town police department, this is the spectrum of which it'll start to get to, Gestapo levels, right? Okay, you know, the Gestapo and the Soviet tier secret police. That's what you're going to start to get to. And I wish, you know, it could be somewhat of an exaggeration, but history tells us this. And so Mark over at Centerline Systems, like, that's a great point. Like, they shouldn't be running around like clandestine operatives. We already have laws to protect them, not to mention the right to self-defense. If a crazy person attacks them, breaks the law. See what I'm putting down. Yeah, picking up what you're putting down, man. Definitely picking up what you're putting down. Once given, never gotten back. Exactly. Also, that was by Centerline Systems. Let's see here. The police have been slowly militarized over the years. They have ceased wearing police uniforms and have shifted to wearing tactical gear for quite some time. Slow boil. Yeah, dude. I mean, it's really become this police state disposition to where it's like, oh, you know, like we need higher end weaponry. We need, you know, Bearcats. We need better Bearcats. We need more armor. We need this. We need that. Like, the crazy thing is like they're basically tactically SWATifying the entire police department. And most of you who remember the inception of what SWAT was, like, they were the guys you called in for the bad situations. It wasn't every officer. And now they're SWATifying essentially the entire police department, so many jurisdictions all across America. They're giving them all of this gear and all of this equipment and all of this just to go on patrol. You know, like, you can sit there and say, well, some areas are more inherently dangerous than others. And okay, I understand that. But in the end of the day, like, you're not a SWAT cop. You're not a clandestine operator. You are there to serve the public trust. You're there to serve the people. You know, you are not a door kicker. I don't care what anybody says. Like, you're not a door. That's not your primary job. You know, like, you could be helping Ethel, 90-year-old Ethel, get across the street. That is part of public service. I would much rather have you do that than have to annoy people over things like registration tabs or insurance or whatever the case is. Like it's just a waste of public funds and time and effort when you could be doing things that are more meaningful, up to and including actually conducting investigations, the way that you used to. Yeah, so there's there's a lot of very coinciding comments here, but I think you guys can kind of get the point. Like it really is a cascade of effects, and I think when you federalize this, you only start to see these things just boil down into more of these erroneous, egregious outcomes. Whether it's SWATifying, militarizing, whatever the case is, it becomes a problem, and you start veering away from actual public service, and what it is it becomes more of a defense of the government apparatus, and we have started to see that. I would argue decades ago, and it's only just gotten more exponentially worse as time has gone on. So honestly, like, you guys killed it in the comments for this, and I do want to pivot over to the war against the cartel, because I think you're going to see this as a factor, right? Federalizing the police. But it's not just the police force. There's now consideration, and I believe it, strong consideration, that they want to take us to war against the cartels. Now, on its face, sounds like a great plan, right? Finally, we're putting the boot to the neck of these cartels. We're finally going to get ours. Like, it sounds really, really good on paper. It makes for incredible tabloids, talking points. Sounds really good in a speech. But none of these people, much like the wars in the Mideast, much like places in Bosnia and Serbia, much like all of these other places that we've been around the world, there's one consideration that none of these people think about. And then when something happens, everybody's surprised, like, oh my gosh, like, how could we ever have assumed that this was going to be the outcome? And there's one word that I actually really love, and I know many other people in the liberty movement love discussing this as well, because it's super relevant. It's a little term called blowback. Say we go to war with the cartels. Well, first off, if we're going to call it a war, then let us formally declare war. Okay? Let us make a formal declaration of war, and then specifically cite the people or persons that we're going after and formalize this. Because if we're going to go to war with somebody, let's do it the best way that we can, right? And not just do it because it's a feel-good thing. But what I would caution people with is there is a situation that's not accounted for in this war with the cartels. It is blowback. And if you think what's happening right now is bad with the cartels, you think all the drugs are bad, the human trafficking is bad, I'm here to tell you, we start going to war with the cartels, you're going to see there's a higher degree. You're going to see high casualty events. You're going to start seeing things like IEDs used. You're going to start seeing far more aggressive action along the border. You're going to start seeing far more dynamic movements. But you're also, outside of dynamic movements, what you're going to start to see is these cartels, which they do, and they're pretty good at doing it, is snatch and grabs. They'll find some senator's kid or something like that. They'll come in, take them, hold them for ransom. Then they're going to get everybody by the balls, and then they're going to have to figure out how to navigate this. This is part of blowback, dude. Like, I don't want any of this, right? Nobody wants any of this. Nobody wants this to be a reality. But when you have people that are just totally insistent in going to war, and then they don't account for all of these things, and I barely touched on it, right? Like centerline systems, like, me and him have had conversations before. Like, at the end of the day, there's so much that you have to consider before you do something. And for whatever reason, it always seems like all of these guys, when they start their holy crusade against whatever enemy it is of the day, whatever the flavor of the day is, they're all of a sudden surprised that something horrible happens, right? It's one of those things to where, like, we were all shocked at 9/11, except for the fact that 9/11 was kind of an expected outcome for all of the things that we were doing in the Middle East. And whether I look, like, you don't have to like the guy, but bin Laden was completely open about a lot of these things. Like, you start doing deals in places you don't belong, and you start trying to prop up these regimes, and then when they're no longer a use to you, you throw them under the rug, and then you fund the people that are fighting them. Like, you're going to have blowback. You trample all over the Middle East, you trample into places like Eastern Europe, you do all these different things, you're going to have blowback. It's an expected outcome. But none of these, high level, supposedly IQ senators and congressmen and House of Representatives, or even up to and including the president themselves and their administrations, none of them are willing to even have that conversation. Because if you avoid that conversation, you know what you get when you avoid that conversation? You get surprise. You get shock. We didn't know that this was going to happen. You can also deny the fact that you were ever in a place. Well, I don't understand why this happened. This is a shock to us. Like, how could they come to our country and do these things? Cough, cough. We were there covertly, or whatever the case was, running operations, whether it was color revolutions or whatever the case is, and they get to act surprised about it. Then you can galvanize the American people to want to wage a full-on war that carries on for over 20 years. I think most of you are probably pretty tired of that. But we're talking about something on our border. And I'm not saying don't defend the border. That's not what I'm saying. Absolutely defend the border. Harden the border if you have to. Take constructive steps to make sure that the border is secure, and take the appropriate steps to make that an effective outcome. But when you're talking about going to war with an adversary, you have to understand, especially at the border, you open your country up to retaliation, to blowback, to severe consequences. And I'm not personally convinced that the administration or anybody who's behind any of these decisions at all really care enough to make those considerations. And when somebody, when you have a situation, like, oh, we don't understand this. Like, look, this is the same government who funds rival cartels to fight each other, who trafficked drugs for the cartels in planes, like, who ran weapons, who helped in human smuggling, right? Like this is the same government that did business with the cartels. And now you're going to expect me that somehow that this war against the cartels is all of a sudden not going to generate a sense of blowback, but in conjunction that the government's going to stop doing business with the cartels. Like, we're doing business with Jelani in Syria. The guy's a head chopper. We helped put him there. All this terrorist talk and all this talk about, like, we don't negotiate with terrorists and all this other garbage is just wonderful talking points to make you fall on one side of this. All while they go right behind your back and still make the deals anyways. And look, I'm not saying you shouldn't talk to people, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to deal with things to have a better outcome. But the point is like, in the end of the day, these people are hypocrites. So we have to be very cautious about this whole war with the cartels thing, because I'm here to tell you, don't take my word for it. Okay, just go back and look at history. Go back and look at all of the trafficking and all of these other things. There's a whole host and litany of whistleblowers from the ATF and the CIA and the DEA and stuff like that. A whole host of them that you can catalog through and hear their reports about the South America, Central America, and the dealings with the cartels. Like, look, I mean, it speaks for itself. I was talking earlier about the merits, right? Like, well, it stands on its own merits. This is going to be extremely dangerous for the American people. And I think that people have a right to understand how dangerous it's going to be. If this is the course that they decide to go, they need to explain this inherent danger. And furthermore, if you are going to pursue this war, then you darn well better not be arresting people for defending their property when it eventually spills over to their homes, and at least allow them a fighting chance. Because Lord knows you don't care about those people. So if you don't care about them, let them care about themselves. I'm going to go through a couple comments regarding this here real quick, but man, it's just crazy. And you have so many people that just willy-nilly are just all for it. They're ready to jump on this train. They want to do it. You know, like, we'll go in, we'll do all of this. Not even withstanding, you know, and I get, like, Mexico is corrupt. I 100% understand that. But in the end of the day, like, you got to have dialogue, dude. Even with people you don't like, you got to at least attempt to have some form of dialogue. And if they're not ready to do it, then, well, you know, wait till they grow up. You know, like, but you still have to. We used to be a country where we talked to people we didn't like. That's how we averted turning ourselves into a nuclear wasteland the first time, right? Like, I'm just saying, dude, like, diplomacy goes a long way, and there's more than one way to solve a situation. And you know, this idea of being forcefully strong all the time really is not a true indicator of actually being strong. If you solely rely on force to put forth your will or make your demands or whatever the case is, I would argue that you're actually weaker than you think you are. And that is the perception that most people will come away with, is, oh, they have to use force to solve every problem. Well, I guess they're not as strong, or they don't believe enough in their own principles to substantiate it or to stand on their own merits. So there's a lot to be taken from this. Oh, Centerline Systems. Admit nothing, make counter accusations, deny everything, blame the innocent. 100%, dude. Like, in the end of the day, like, the gaslighting that will occur. So gaslighting is essentially inverting the blame, right? Like, if you're convincing the person who's been aggressed, the person who is the victim, that no, like, this was your doing. This was your like. Oh gosh, yeah. There's so much that's going to come from this that I don't think people or the government is fundamentally prepared to even understand how far that this is going to go. Learn me something. Put a nice little one. Would the senator thing be so bad? I mean, that's not for me to decide. It is definitely a question. I will say, though, that what we would get from something like that is probably a ridiculous, overwhelming use of military authority, having to violate the sanctity and sovereignty of other nations in order to justify a retaliatory strike, and then say, like, whoops, like, we didn't mean for that to happen, you know? Like, I mean, we already know that these are the same individuals who will pretty much ice an entire, they'll glass an entire school. You know, this government will glass an entire school to get one guy. So, I mean, take that for what you will. And that's beyond the point of scandal, right? Because you know that they're going to try and bargain, pay, do whatever, make a trade deal, whatever the case is, to try and rectify that issue. Man, like, so this is crazy. We cannot solve any problems if we do not create problems to be solved, dude. And that's it. Like, that is like one of the biggest arguments. That's another huge argument as to why you don't want federalized police, because, you know, as soon as that starts to happen, they will just make up problems to justify their existence. The same reason that they have made up so many different issues, so many different problems for why we still have to go and fight everybody around the world to bomb all these countries. We're still bombing Somalia. Like, we've been at this for, like, what, 3 decades now? bombing Somalia. We've been at it for almost 3 decades, or right around 3 decades. Like, why are we still bombing Somalia? And we're still justifying it. We're still justifying it. I mean, so it's insane. Yeah, no, this is the same government that'll make up any excuse whatsoever to justify having to continue to stay in the fight, right? Because there's always an enemy creeping around the corner. And it's crazy because it's like, well, I think, I talk about and joke about having a schizo rant before, but if we're talking about schizophrenics, I think all we have to look at is what's going on in DC, if you ask me. It's good for the pocketbooks, though. They can justify a big budget. So I guess, good on you, bunch of degenerates. Let's not forget the cartels do business with terrorists. The retaliation may be facilitated. Yeah, no, dude. Like, and the crazy thing is, learn me something, is if we're funding cartels and we're funding terrorists, a homeland attack sponsored, funded, and brought to you by the United States government. You show me where all that money goes, and I guarantee you at some point it's we funded the people that did it anyways. At this point, it's much more believable that that's going to be likely the case than anything else. Like, I guarantee you, if you did a full audit, dude, you would find our money supporting so many terrorist groups, so many different cartels that quite frankly, it's again, if you go back to the annals of history and you look at some of the testimony given, I mean, dude, we funded cartels fighting each other. We funded terrorist groups fighting each other. Places like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. We propped up all these different regimes. So, I mean, it's not beyond. I mean, again, I wish I could say it was ironic, but it's just a reality that if that did happen, if we did, do something against the cartels that merited them to retaliate, the likelihood is extremely high, but the likelihood is also extremely high too that you're going to end up having a situation to where we funded the guys that just did something to us. So I hate every bit about that. So it's absolutely insane. Joe, great to see you, brother. Absolutely great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for checking it out, man. So good to have you here. We're going to move on to the last point here, because I could probably just speak ad nauseum about this, but I don't want to beat a dead horse. I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about, incidentally, funding and meddling and more things the CIA and the State Department are involved in. So in the country of Georgia, which I don't know how geographically inclined my viewers are. I would assume you guys are pretty sharp cookies. You guys could navigate yourself around a map. You're smarter than the average bears, I would say. But man, Georgia is becoming a hotbed of interest for the United States and our quote unquote allies. The CIA has been getting kind of hot and heavy as well as the State Department, and trying to foment unrest in the country of Georgia, the nation of Georgia. And it's very problematic. Like I was saying, for those of you that know how to read a map, Georgia's right next to Russia. And this is problematic for the fact that what I think we're starting to see here, and mind you, the EU rejected the just nomination or the just election in Romania of a duly elected duly elected president, I believe it was. And it's amazing how they have usurped essentially the populace that lives in Romania, their chosen person. the person that they elected, the person that they voted for. The EU rejected this, and so they ended up doing different elections, right? Like, so you have what's going on in Romania. There's some unrest in Serbia right now between people who are pro-EU and NATO and anti-EU and NATO, along with some other issues in Serbia. You're seeing unrest again, in Georgia, and I think Georgia is very specific, and here's the reason why I want to focus on this. Paul, hey, buddy. Great to see you. Georgia is important because I see what's going on in Georgia right now, the meddling, I do think that there is the potential for us to see a potential color revolution. It may not be. It may not be the outcome, but I think that there are definitely rumblings and goings on that are certainly leading towards that potential, that outcome. This is a problem with Georgia being on the border with Russia, next to Russia, and because what we're starting to see is the Ukraine-Russia war is coming to a close. And unfortunately, for the United States and the EU, their egos got bent over a barrel really hard. And what people need to understand about this is, while NATO wasn't, well, I shouldn't say NATO wasn't directly involved. There's been enough dead people from NATO countries found on the battlefield fighting Russia. So let me not say that with certainty, but NATO has definitely been involved. NATO officers have certainly been killed in Ukraine. And along with American personnel, to which we'll deny up and down. But the problem is they got bent over a barrel over Ukraine. They thought they were going to have this locked down tight. They thought Russia's nothing. They're incapable. They're incompetent. They certainly can't win. All while ignoring the entire premise of what their operation is. All while ignoring what their the things that they're asking for is, their concerns for security. They have ignored every single thing pertaining to Russia and continued to paint Russia as a inept, incapable, country that can't do anything. NATO has become a situation, the EU, the United States, we have befallen ourselves into a situation where not only are stockpiles extremely low, our manufacturing ability is very low. We have a situation to where we thought it was going to be locked down. It wasn't that that was not the case at all. As a matter of fact, it was so much in the other direction that it's not it's irreconcilable. And so coming away from this, you still have these people that are so hawkish and are still so hell-bent on trying to hurt Russia. This is their modus operandi, right? Like this is their only goal in life, is to destroy Russia, essentially, to attack Russia, to foment regime change and westernize Russia. And so they're starting to look at these other countries and they're starting to try and get involved in places like Georgia. Now, Georgia has been a point of interest for a very long time, for several decades, as have many other countries. There's a reason that we have been involved in protest. When I say we, this government has been involved, as well as NATO countries have been involved. And there is a situation to where every time that these entities, these people are involved, there's massive flashpoint protests. There's massive, gatherings in the streets, just seemingly out of nowhere most of the time. And look, I'm not saying that in some of these countries, some of the protests may or may not be justified or grassroots. It's very, very possible that that could be. And I think Serbia, to some degree, is kind of like that weird combination to where I think there's definitely funded people there, but I also think that you have grassroots. It becomes very difficult, though, because once you start blending all these countries and you look and see how much of this activity is going on, I think Ukraine, what happened with Maidan in 2014, gave us a look into the sphere of how these things are done. And when you've seen that and you compare this to some of the other events, some of these other protests, some of these other, things that have gone on, you're like, hey, I've seen this before. I've seen this play out before. I know how I know how the story goes. It's 2025. We've seen how the story goes. It's very dangerous because they're continuously going back to what I was saying earlier. They're constantly looking for someone to fight, constantly looking for someone to fight. This does not bode well for us. And all of these conversations that I've had this evening, up to and including this one, all comes at the expense of liberty and rights. We got the Patriot Act and updated versions of the NDAA. We've gotten so many other horrible pieces of legislation, laws, bills, all of these things. And if you've noticed, a huge portion of these have come when we're at war. Some of the most egregious ones are coming from wartime. There's a reason that perpetual war is good for the ruling class, for the people who are tyrannical, because they can exert whatever powers that they feel they can get away with, and they have their form of justification. Well, we're at war, so we have to make sure we're not infiltrated. Well, we're at war, so we have to make sure we're defending our home. Well, we're at war. It's BS. It's complete bull hockey. And you cannot fall for this. You have to understand how to recognize this. And Georgia has me concerned. Doesn't have me overly concerned, but concerned enough to where I'm very trepidatious about this and where it merits the attention. There is a pattern here. And we have to identify the pattern. We have to say no more meddling in countries, because then we get that thing called blowback. And again, justification every single time. Well, we're at war. There's enemies out there. There's always going to be enemies out there. But like I said before, we actually used to find a way to diplomatically try to talk to these people and diffuse things. So that way, even if they're not our friends, they're at least not perpetually our enemies. We can have disagreements. We don't have to fight every single person around the world. And this perpetual meddling in places like Georgia only opens up a door for a much wider conflict. We have clearly not learned our lesson from the conflagration and the conflict in Ukraine. And I'm here to tell you, we didn't win. We still ride on the laurels of World War II and the Cold War and this idea of superiority and supremacy. It's not there anymore. And, to be honest, it can be okay. If anything, it'll hopefully exchange our hubris for actually coming back down to earth to a more grounded perspective. We can't do this anymore, though. All of the potential of hopefully avoiding a wider conflict is seemingly shrinking the more and more invested we get into it. All our meddling in Georgia guarantees is further issues with Russia. When we shouldn't be having issues with Russia, we should be trading with Russia. We should be doing business with Russia. We should in the very least have relatively neutral or okayish relations with Russia. You're talking about minerals. Trump signed the mineral deal. Well, guess what? The mine that the mineral deal was signed for, Russia has it now. And they're not giving it back. They're not going to give it back. Anybody that thinks that they're going to cede this territory come tomorrow, if they did, it would be the shock of the century. I'm here to tell you, it would be the shock of the century. And because of the fact that these 4 oblasts that Russia is currently fighting to secure, right? It's not the only reason. The territory was not the entirety or the primary reason of why they went into Ukraine. There's a number of them. And anybody can go back and look at that. But they constitutionally recognize these 4 oblasts in Russia. It is law. It is law. They are not going to give these up. If Putin were to give these up, which to my understanding, he doesn't technically have the authority to do anyways. You want to talk about people that would, like, the guy would be strung. Like, this is what most people fundamentally don't even want to acknowledge, is that the Russians are not Americans. They're not Brits. They're not French. They're not German. They're not this. And that's the point. Like, all these so-called experts that go on Fox News that talk about Russia, all of these things fundamentally have no clue of what they're talking about because they don't care. And when you try to fight an enemy you're not fundamentally trying to understand, that puts you at a severe disadvantage. And if we get into something with Russia over Georgia, at the current moment, we don't even have enough anti-air stockpile to go for what has been suggested now, is being repeatedly suggested for more than 15 days if we were to get into a war of attrition. 15 days. That is what our stockpile for anti-air missiles are. 15 days. And we're over here trying to pick a fight or change over another country because we think that we're totally invincible. And I look, I'm here to tell you, and I'll wrap it up kind of with this. It's always the people who have to perpetually talk all the freaking time and say it so loud of how winning they are, how successful they are, how strong they are. It's always those people who end up getting their asses kicked in the end because they're so full of themselves, they're so filled with hubris that they can't see the forest for the trees. I don't want to be a part of that, dude. I don't want to be a part of that. And it's unfortunate because we have so many unhinged people in DC right now that are supposed to be our representatives that just, they're gone. They're totally lost. They're totally lost. I'm going to go through some of the comments here, man. But I hope some of this resonates with you guys. And honestly, like, don't take my word for it. There's tons of people out there talking about this, not just me. Scott Horton's talked about this. Daniel Davis, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, Colonel McGregor. Okay. You have people like John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs. So many people are out there talking about this. People much smarter than me. And if I'm able to figure this out, then most people should be able to figure this out because it's all laid out there. And these are guys who have more of an insight. They have more of a historical insight. They have more inside information than I do. They have contacts. And if I'm able to put this together, one, because I listen, and I want to know more and I want to understand, then I feel like most of you guys can too. And I feel like most people can do this. But if you think that the close of Ukraine, which I do think I think we are kind of at a fever pitch at this point. I think if anybody looks at the close of Ukraine conflict is going to be the end of us trying to perpetually bend the Russians over and try and one-up them with this sense of hubris that we have, I think we are sorely mistaken. And we are heading down a path that is not going to lead into anything good. And that's not fear mongering. It's not being afraid. It's just looking at what's on the table. It's looking at what what history tells us and all of these different things. I'm just trying to read it for what it is, man. So the Georgia thing is not good. It's not good. So let me get to the comments here. Really appreciate you guys being so involved. So true. They cannot let it go. They can't. They can't. Like there's this obsession, and I think Daniel Davis had talked about this. McGregor and several others have said, we have an entire class of people in the United States that are still they're still so stuck on this idea that we're fighting the Soviets still. We're still fighting communists. They're every single day, these people wake up and they don't see the Russian Federation. All they see is communists. All they see is a people that haven't changed. And really, the only people who haven't changed in their worldview, who haven't changed in their perspective, are the people that are sitting there perpetually telling themselves all of these different things. It's so dangerous, dude. It's so dangerous. And not willing to recognize when things have changed, that countries can change, and they do. They always do. Hey, dude, you're just 15 steps behind at that point and just dumber for it. Bull hockey. Yeah, that's right. I used bull hockey. There will be a few more old time terms in the future. I'm trying to expand my vocabulary by using some of the more interesting terms that I know. So I'm happy you like that. Truck of money. Last president of Georgia was a French diplomat. Yeah, well, that is a method. that is certainly a method. I don't know that that would be my first choice. We always fight the last war, probably our kryptonite, 100%. And for a lot of people, Mark, unfortunately, they're still riding off the coattails of World War II. They're still riding off the coattails of everything that happened then and shortly after. And there's this perception to where, even the Cold War times, it just doesn't change, man. And honestly, I don't really think that the Mideast helped any of that at all. I think that it was a horrible situation, not obviously just for Americans, but for so many people around the world. And it's so damaging, dude, so damaging. So that's awesome. It's interesting that you bring that up, Chuck, because I do remember hearing about that. And I don't know. Again, it's a method, but if you're not from Georgia and you don't fundamentally understand Georgians and you look at Eastern European, Central European, and a lot of the Slavic people, it's very much in terms of the Middle East, so many people want to have an opinion, but they don't fundamentally understand who these people are, and they don't take the time to understand them. They're not the same. They're not the same as us. And I think that's something the West in general fails to understand in so many places around the world. You think you can go in there with Western values and this Western perspective that you can change everything and it's going to be amazing. But when you fail to even try to understand the people you're attempting to deal with, it's never going to work out. And it may not work out even if you try to understand. That's okay. Centerline systems on this. Yeah, dude. Absolutely. Let's go to the next few. God dang it, man. Technical issues. Just it's user error. It's all me. It's my fault. Chuck, again, maybe we should make lawmakers renounce citizenship of any country but ours. AIPAC would be pissed, dude. The Israeli lobby would be super pissed. Not because a lot of them have necessarily citizenship to Israel, though I mean, that could very well be a possibility. I think the renunciation of any allegiance to a country other than ours, if you're in a position of authority, especially, that may not, it's a method, man. Like, I think that's worth a conversation if you ask me. So they tried to pull a color revolution in Georgia not long ago. Yes, 100%. I do remember that. That is something that was taking place, and I'm super happy it failed, man. Because it would not have helped anything at all. If anything, it's just going to exacerbate those issues. Let's see. Wait, yeah, I love this. But the sad thing is, Centerline, is we have people that literally are convinced that we can fight a multi-front war, like 3-4 countries all at once, and up to and including, I think it was an Air Force general, if I'm not mistaken. You guys can double check this. There was an Air Force general not long ago who literally had made the proposition. He's like, America can wage a nuclear war and we will come out on top. Again, it's a method. It's not the one I would choose, and I would say that that's a pretty big issue. And unfortunately, we've had no shortages of generals or high-ranking military staff recently making some pretty interesting claims about nuclear war, about the feasibility of just rapidly being able to go into a place like Kaliningrad and just being able to conquer it, just taking it over and doing all of these different things. Definitely not the thing that I would do, but it's a method, probably the one that'll get a lot more people killed than not. Like less than a year. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Georgia thing was less than a year ago. It's pretty close, but it's pretty recent too. So let's see here. Whoa, dude. Okay. McGregor, by the way, Mearsheimer was my thesis advisor judge. Sorry, just kind of cool hearing you talk about someone. Dude, John Mearsheimer, if you guys have not listened to some of the stuff that he talks about, amazing, dude. Like, there are some really top-notch guys that, like, you should definitely sit back, listen to what they have to say. These guys are top-notch, and judging by what Centerline Systems was saying, like, I can tell that you probably got a lot out of what Mearsheimer had to say, because he is great. Judge Napolitano, Daniel Davis, and I think Scott Horton have all talked to people like Mearsheimer and McGregor, Davis, Sachs, and so many other people, like just such wealth of knowledge, and people that legitimately actually have some expertise, especially when it comes to Russia, unlike a bunch of the people that are in the positions of power that they are saying that they do, that actually don't even understand. They probably don't even know where a place like Kaliningrad is. But Mearsheimer and some of these other guys, 100% fundamentally understand it. These guys have invested some serious time and went to school fundamentally understanding how a lot of these things work, not just pertaining to Russia, but to a lot of other things. Very sharp guys. So that's a very, very cool. You may have to chat with me about that, because I am really interested to hear what that experience was like. I'm actually kind of jealous, not gonna lie. Cool dude. How about the communist running for mayor in Minneapolis? Well, yeah, I mean, there's, oh man, there's so much that could be said about that. I may actually have to somewhat bring that up with Rebecca on Saturday, because Rebecca, as most of you know, she's from Minnesota, and she is the LP Minnesota chair here. So maybe I'll touch on that on Saturday, because I think that's a conversation that would be nice to have another point of view on. I think, at least for right now, it's not surprising. And it is one of those things to where I think that, again, it's the merits, right? They have to rest on their they have to put it on. They have to put it to the test, and if they fail, then honestly, like, they should be allowed to fail, and they should have to learn how to overcome and deal with that, and because you can't escape those consequences, man. So let's see here. Last few ones, and I'll wrap it up here. I really appreciate you guys staying here for this. Really, really do. Up there, freaking user error again. Failed the color revolution to put the French lady back in the presidency. Yes, that's right. That's right. Now that you say that, that's what it was. Yeah. Yeah, she was not happy either. She was not happy about that. She tried to, if I remember correctly, she actually tried to get a recount or a re-vote over that. Joe's question about what minerals are in Georgia that we would benefit from. As far as like minerals and stuff like that, honestly, I don't know. I would have to look into that. I just know some of the more immediate situations as it's pertaining to the revolution or the unrest, rather. I know it's been a country that NATO's wanted for a long time. And a huge portion of that, I would say more than probably minerals, is it's NATO's overwhelming plan that they've had since, the fall of the Soviet Union from the 90s, probably from about 94 on, that NATO's was used to tell Yeltsin and used to tell so many of these other guys, like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to go eastwards. Then they relented, and allowed NATO East Germany, and it just kind of kept cascading on there. And that's one of the major issues that Russia has. It's one of the biggest things of why everything in Ukraine is occurring is due to NATO, and people are ignoring that. They keep saying it's irrelevant. They ignore it. Whatever the case is, it is one of the primary reasons why Russia has been taking the steps as it pertains to Ukraine that they have. And so, yes, NATO is a huge issue. And all when you look at Georgia being in the proximity that it is to Russia, it would be one more step closer to Russia to be able to put missiles on their border, to be able to garrison people there. Again, if you look at one of my last diatribes that I did last Thursday, I talked all about the military bases, and I talked about all of these different things. Not only is it not fundamental for us, but it drains us, and it usurps the sovereignty of these countries. It makes them essentially dependents. We've having our military bases there out exporting all of this stuff, everything that comes with it. We have essentially neutered most of Western Europe. They can't even fundamentally hold themselves up anymore. Their militaries are crumbling, and unfortunately, there's a lot wrong with our military too. And our stockpiles right now are horrible. They're absolutely horrible. It's man, it is just there's no reason whatsoever to have almost between 750 to 900 military bases around the world. We're building more. We're building more. There's 6 more that I think are, I can't remember what country it is, but there's 6 more going into another Eastern European country. And yeah, I mean, it robs the American people. By doing this, it just expands an empire that's dying. We don't have the ability to prop these up, and it's not for us to prop up other countries. We have destroyed a huge portion of Europe because we have said that we were going to prop them up, and now we can barely even do that. We don't even have the stockpiles to do that, and it's not our job. Look, and I said before, if a country invites us to train with them, to garrison some of our people there at their bases for training endeavors, whatever, dude, okay, whatever, yeah, you should be able to get along with other countries and train with them, but we don't need bases there. We should only be there on an invitation only. And for a lot of people who say, well, they told us we could set up bases there. Look, these are people that have forsaken the sacred sovereignty out from underneath the people that they are supposed to represent. It is by its very nature a usurpation of those people. For us to be there and for those politicians to sell sell them out to the extent of having American bases there, it's not for us to be there. These countries need to stand on their own. It is not for us to be there, and there are different ways that we can defend our country without having to be having a base in almost 750 between 750 to 900 different locations. It's there, it's very antiquated. It's run its course, and it is antithetical overall to the security of the United States, because what it does is it sets up a myriad of justifications, and I put that in air quotes, justifications as being tripwires to just get involved into another conflict that we wouldn't otherwise be in if we weren't sitting in different countries. So it's crazy, dude. So I hope that kind of talks about that a little bit, but I appreciate you guys. I'm going to wrap it up here. We're at an hour 16, a little bit longer than what I normally do on my solo endeavors, but I really appreciate you guys coming over here, spending some time with me, Redbeard, your wonderful host here. And stop in Saturday nights at 1700 Central Time. I'm having Rebecca Whiting on. She's super pumped to come back on. Really pumped to talk about the farming, agriculture, the divesting from the empire, and the investing in liberty. And maybe we'll get into some local politics a little bit here and there. We'll see where it goes. I'm going to kind of leave it a little open-ended, but bring your questions, and definitely don't be afraid to throw comments in the comment section. She had a really good time with that, so I really look forward to that. And also, I'm going to do one more plug here for September 4th. Put it on your calendars. Make sure you notate it down. I am having Scott Horton back on my show. It was a pleasure to have Scott on the first time, and my only regret is that we didn't have as much time as I would have hoped, but we're getting him back on. So I'm really going to be enthused to have him back on to hopefully cover more of the European aspect. Maybe we'll talk about China a little bit and a few other things, but thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And we will see you on Saturday for the next show with Rebecca Whiting. Go forth, spread liberty, carry that torch, be awesome people. And I'm going to leave you guys with an outro song. So without further ado, here we go. Steel-clad fist, rise in the dark. Shatter chains, ignite the spark. Tyrants crumble, feel the flame. Settle strike and freedom sing. March of vengeance, hearts of stone, blades of justice.
flames of liberty burn forever.